Am I audible, Ranjan?
Good morning, you're audible.
Morning.
Hello, and I can see several of the thing. Hello,
Morning.
good morning. I can see Professor Rajiv Sangal. Hello, Partho. Good morning. And then Ms. Kirti Seth. Hello. Great. Then I can see Terry. Hi, Terry. Great to see you. Wonderful. Abhishek. Hi, welcome. And we're waiting for some more participants to join in. Secretary Mighty, I can see the connection. Perhaps he'll be joining shortly.
He's already joined me tested.
Okay, all right. And then Dr. Vyas, hello. Thank you for joining. Looking forward to your thoughts today.
Thank
I think Secretary School Education and Literacy, welcome, madam.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you for joining. Yes, and let me see. Ms. Shabnam Sinha is yet to join from the World Bank, but
I will just get a message sent to her.
okay, great. And I believe the streaming is online. Our IT team has confirmed that the streaming on YouTube channel is already started. So we are pretty much live as of now. Yeah. Good morning, Dr. Sane. Thank you for joining.
Secretary Meti has joined.
Yes,
I'm here. Welcome, sir.
And I am not Dr. Meti, but Dr. Sani, but thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Welcome. Right. So we will perhaps wait for a minute to wait for Dr. Shabnam Sinha to join, and then once she's logged in, we will start right away. So do we have a confirmation from Dr. Okay. And Dr. Mangal Sundar, is he joining? Hello, Professor Mangal Sundar. I missed you. Apologies. Thank you for joining.
Okay, you have already responded to me, so you did not miss me.
Yes.
I've asked you something and you replied, so you know I'm there.
Yes, yes.
So I'm writing some things
Just,
so that I can share with you later.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just spoke to Dr. Shabnam Sinha. She was under the impression she has to join at 3:30. She's just joining.
Great. We're just checking in if she has joined or not. Yes, I think she's joining as we speak. Yes, welcome, Dr. Shabnam Sinha. Thank you for joining. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can, and my apologies. I was clicking on the wrong link. My sincere apologies.
No problem. So I think we have everybody here. So let us begin. We are 5 minutes behind time, but hopefully we'll make up for it. So let us formally begin. Secretary Mighty, Secretary School Education and Literacy, eminent panelists, experts, and dear participants joining us online from across the country. A very good morning to all of you. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this breakout session. This is titled The Digital Teacher, Creating Quality e-Content and Virtual Labs for Inclusivity, Better Learning Outcomes, and Skilling. I'm Ranjan Bose, your host and moderator for this session. So if the teacher has been compared to the proverbial ladder, then the digital teacher is really like the escalator, with the potential for true democratization of quality education, as well as universalization of education. As we have all seen, the world of education is undergoing a transformational change. And in my opinion, here are the 6 Ds of this changing world. The education today is definitely more digital, diverse, distributed, disruptive, data-centric, and of course, driven by mission. At the same time, we are asking very relevant questions related to the real learning outcomes, effective learning, active learning, and most importantly, inclusivity. We know content has always been the king, but the delivery of content and access to quality content is now the real moot topic. Virtual labs, for example, are empowering students not only to learn at their own pace, at their own time, but harness the power of virtualization, visualization, and learn from making mistakes. Yet another question that we have to answer today is how to align the end-to-end supply chain for dynamic skilling, as Honorable PM said today, right up to employability, especially in the post-COVID era. What really is the effect of pandemic on education learning loss? So we are going to debate on all of these, perhaps most of these important topics in the backdrop of recently announced initiatives in the national budget, as well as the forward-looking National Education Policy, NEP 2020, and the National Digital Education Architecture, NDA. So let me quickly share with you the list of panelists that we have so that we know who are the experts and our panelists joining us today. And I will perhaps take 1 minute to go to this. I hope my screen is visible. So our breakout session, there are 7 breakout sessions as we speak. And our session is titled The Digital Teacher, Creating Quality E-Content and Virtual Labs for Inclusivity, Better Learning Outcomes and Skilling. And here are our set of panelists. So we are honored to have co-chairs, Mr. Ajay Sawhney, Secretary Mighty, and Ms. Anita Karwal, Department of School Education, Secretary, Department of School Education and Literacy. Our panelists are Dr. Shabnam Sinha from the World Bank and Mr. Terry Dunyan from UNICEF. I will be your moderator. Next slide. And then we have this eminent set of experts, Professor Partha Pratim Chakrabarti, IIT Kharagpur, Dr. J.M. Vyas from NFSU Ahmedabad, and Professor Rajiv Sangal, IIIT Hyderabad, Ms. Kirti Seth from NASCOM, then Professor Mangal Sundar, pioneer from IIT Madras, Abhishek Singh, CEO MyGov, and of course, Professor Deepak Phatak. He has shared his thoughts and he may not join us today live. So with that, I now invite Shri Ajay Sawhney, Secretary, Ministry of Education, Electronics, Information Technology, Secretary Mighty, to kindly address the gathering virtually. Over to you, Mr. Sawhney.
Thank you, Professor Bose. It's a delight for me to be a part of this wonderful panel. Anita Karwal ji and the professors who are here, Professor Mangal Sundar and Professor Parthapratim Chakravarti and other panelists who have joined in. It's a wonderful time to be talking about digital education. Over the past few years, we have had tremendous success in rolling out initiatives around e-governance in almost every sector, and education has been hotbed of activity. A large number of projects have already got rolled out, some by the central government, some by the state governments, also by the private companies, and a few that are collaborative projects between the governments and the private sector, like the Future Skills Prime platform, and that MIT has implemented with the help of NASSCOM. Now, what is it's very clear that at this point, plenty of projects are there for digital learning. Plenty of initiatives have been taken, both at the school education level and higher education level. How do we make it come alive for everyone? So I'll first mention a few of the initiatives that have already been rolled out and which are successfully available to students and teachers. One notable platform is the OLabs platform. This is a platform on which online labs have been made available, covering physics, chemistry, bio, maths, and English. About 173 online labs that have become available. These are available in 4 languages currently. In this, Amrita University has been a wonderful partner for us, along with CDAC. The second initiative that I would like to mention in this specific space is Future Skills Prime. NASSCOM has been our partner, and it's basically a B2C framework for reskilling and upskilling of IT professionals in all the new and emerging technologies. Something which is absolutely required today, especially looking at the severe shortage of skilled people at very high levels of competence that the industry is witnessing today. These courses cover AR and VR, they cover big data analytics, AI, robotic process automation, IoT, and they will go on to cover many other areas like additive manufacturing, cloud computing, social and mobile, cyber security, blockchain, etc. There's another wonderful program that we had embarked upon. These are the ICT Academies. These were primarily to be able to train teachers across the country, and there are 7 leading institutions that are partners with us in this program. There's also a general purpose learning management system, LMS, that the National E-Governance Division in Ministry of Electronics and IT has successfully rolled out. Abhishek Singh ji is a part of the panel. I'm sure he will mention more about this initiative. There are so many initiatives by the central government, by the agencies associated with the central government and the states. At this point, how do we converge across these? How do we bring about a serious shift into the digital learning platforms so that teachers as well as students can seriously benefit from these? The first aspect is what kind of content we are able to bring in. Are we spending too much time on creating content when content is already available from a huge number of sources? How to balance between creation and curation of what is available, sourcing the best that is available, and not remaining confined. Sometimes when we try to do it ourselves, especially, and it's more looking at our efforts from within the government, then we end up with content which is good, but one could have really excellent content involving creative people and people who are experts on the pedagogy and other aspects of learning. So I think curation has to be given much, much more importance. The second aspect of around content is comprehensiveness. Is there some patchy content which is available in a few topics, really excellent content, and in a few topics you don't have anything of that quality? Is it consistent? Does it help you cover the entire curriculum A to Z, or do you have to, are you still dependent on the traditional mode, which in many ways, you are trying to move away from the traditional mode because that has not been good enough in many aspects. So are we building something which is comprehensive, which can cover A to Z of what is required? And of course, it will still need to be balanced with the local mentoring and local guidance. But is it complete in itself? When we have, for instance, textbooks, the first thing we are sure of is that, yes, this textbook covers the content that CBSE has, NCERT and CBSE are recognized that, yes, this is what needs to be done and it covers it end to end. So that I think is an important aspect of on the content side. The NDR and the NDR higher education initiatives that are currently underway. NDR, the architecture had been unveiled and it's in the build stage. In fact, in an advanced stage, considering that diksha.gov.in is already in place and it's a significant contributor to what the overall NDR will be. Anita Karwalji has personally led that effort and it's come up so beautifully. The national public digital platforms like NDR and NDRH, or whatever platforms they finally result in, are exceedingly important for us because these represent not just digital teacher or digital opportunity of digital learning. These are end-to-end platforms covering all of what one requires in education, whether it is for a student or a teacher or parents or for people who run institutions, or for content providers, or for bodies that specialize in specific skills, or for those that conduct examinations, or for the, from the government, the boards and various entities that get involved. What this promises to do is to be a single sign-on for everyone. And by being a single sign-on, there is, as per the concept that is being taken forward, personalization comes in alongside. For every student, where in their educational journey, in their learning journey, has the student reached? What is the student finding easy to accomplish? What are the difficulties? Personalization comes in only through this kind of a platform, because then your experience across different learning environments, which are all finally hopefully going to be a part of the National Public Digital Education Platform, whether you learn on X platform or Y platform, your account knows where you have reached and what you have found very easy, and what are the areas where you are still struggling. And that can be carried across from one learning environment, one learning platform to another. So that's a great, great, great advantage. And when all the students in India are onto one platform, all the content providers are onto one platform, the convergence itself is mind-boggling, and the finest of resources can be brought into such a platform, because the return on investment will be extraordinarily high, because you are potentially addressing the billion strong, maybe a few 100 million students across their learning journey. So this is one thing I wanted to emphasize. Thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I really look forward to seeing digital learning take center stage as the national platforms roll out and gain maturity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sone, for those wonderful remarks. I think you mentioned the 5 C's: curation of content, comprehensiveness, consistency, coverage, and completeness, and of course, the importance of single sign-on and personalization of education. Thank you so much. Let me now invite Secretary, School Education and Literacy, Ms. Karwal, to kindly share her thoughts, please.
Thank you. A very good morning to all the esteemed panelists and Secretary Meti, and the moderator for the day, who has a very tough job, Dr. Bose. Sir has given actually a context in which we would be looking forward to the discussions. I would just like to add a few things here. I would like to mention that the budget announcement, actually there are 4 budget announcements for the school department. The first one is having a separate breakaway session, which is the 200 TV channels. Then there are 3 budget announcements on which we have to discuss. Those 3 are: number 1, about a digital teacher. Number 2 is virtual labs, and number 3 is skill labs. Virtual labs in science and mathematics. Number 3 is skill labs. And all of these put together for improving the learning outcomes with the help of digital resources. Now, one more thing I would like to mention is that in the last 2 years, we have started actually documenting what is happening in the digital space in India, particularly by the states. Our document is called the India Report on Digital Education. The IRDE 2020 was the first document which came out last year. It is a state-wise documentation of what is happening in the states, what are the innovations that are happening in the digital space for school education. The IRDE 2021 has recently come out, and if you go through it, you will find that the pandemic has actually been a provocator for ensuring that a lot of innovation takes place. Things that we had never imagined, exams through WhatsApp, have happened during this period. So there are several things, of course, out there, but I just thought I should mention that. Now, Sir has mentioned OLAB, Sir has mentioned Diksha. I want to mention that on Diksha, we already have 2.3 lakh pieces of e-content in 36 Indian languages, including the Indian Sign Language. And the format and the type of content which is there is, one, it is in the form of energized textbooks. So all our NCERT textbooks and 65% of the state textbooks have been energized, meaning thereby that there are QR codes in every chapter. And behind the QR code, we have tagged them with relevant e-content, which is available anytime, anywhere for the child. And we have seen from 5 to 6 crore page hits a day during the pandemic. It still continues on the energized textbooks. The other formats in which we have, we make content available is chatbots, even IVRS. We have talking books for the visually impaired. We have Indian Sign Language content from grade preschool to grade 12, all subjects covered in Indian Sign Language on Diksha. One way that we are collecting and collaborating with the community is through Vidyadan, in which we call for content from organizations, individuals, experts, institutions to contribute content. And we actually ask for the kind of content, the grade for which we want, the subject that we want, the topic we want, and the language we want it. And I'm glad to tell you that more than 30,000 pieces of content were received. And then we have a system, online system of curation. We have been able to accept more than 23,000 pieces of content, and we have put it on Diksha. Now, let me come to the discussions which are to be held today. So first, of course, is the discussion. We would like your suggestions on how do you think quality can be improved in the limited resources that government has. So this is something which we really look forward to. Second thing I want to mention is that all our content is coherent. We call it the Coherence Project, which means that whatever we do not want, that children who hear on the radio hear some different content, which is of a lower quality, while what they see on Diksha is of a much higher quality. So we started the Coherence Project, in which all content that is available either on Diksha or One Class, One TV channel or on radio is the same. And that actually takes a lot of work for us, when we want to make it a coherent content. So you will notice on the PM eVidya channel, where we run the One Class, One TV channel, there is a QR code at the bottom. So a child who is not wanting to see the channel at that point of time can simply read the barcode and keep the content offline and see it later on. So we have developed coherence between the two, and now between radio and Diksha and television also, we have been able to develop a lot of content which is coherent. So this is another area. If you have any suggestions, we look forward to it. Then NEP talks about a blended approach. If you see chapter 24, very clearly it says that eventually, and what the Honorable Prime Minister also said today, that when you are going digital, of course, inclusion is the first thing that happens. Access and inclusion is the first thing that happens, along with resilience. But what he mentioned today was that from inclusion, we are going to move towards integration. So we are going to move towards integration in textbooks. We are already doing it through the energized textbooks, but there could be so many more methodologies of doing it. So the digital teacher need not necessarily be available only through a digital device. It could be available through a textbook, like the energized textbook or any other format. So this is another area how the coherence can take place, how the blended mode of teaching and integration of teaching can take place. This could be a point of discussion. I want to mention that the National Curriculum Framework, which is always an output of a new education policy, is actually right now as we speak is under preparation and should be out by the end of this year. And there one of the cross-cutting themes is digital education. So we have picked up 5 cross-cutting themes. One is, of course, inclusion, knowledge of India, and ICT and gender and environment. These are my cross-cutting themes, which we feel will figure in the entire curriculum. So we look forward to your suggestions on that as well. With regard to the digital teacher, now the digital teacher, as we understand, is is something that a child is able to learn through a device, as if the device, whoever is present on the device, or the voice which is there, or whatever content is there, is teaching the child, and the child does not need a physical teacher. Which would mean that the content has to be not only just curriculum based, covering the various topics, etc. It should also have criterion referenced items. It should be able to check whether the child has achieved its learning outcomes, etc. And if the child has not been able to achieve, then there has to be adaptive learning, and the child should be able to go back to the learning outcome that the child has missed out on. This requires us to actually provide forward and backward linkages of all learning outcomes. I'm glad to tell you that the process has started, and we have been able to do it up to grade 3 so far. And you can see it on our website also in the Nipun Bharat document in Annexure 1. The whole backward forward linkage of the learning outcome is given for language and mathematics. Unless we do that, adaptive learning is going to be difficult. But we look forward to your suggestions on this. We would also like to know from you, what do you feel should be the kind of collaborations, whether it is with the community, with institutions, if you have suggestions for that, organizations, with CSR, with etc., etc. We look forward to your suggestions on that. The digital teacher would be particularly very, very useful for children with special needs. And during the pandemic, we have found that because of our constraint of resources, we do not have special educators in the quantity and the quality that is required. The Honorable High Court of Delhi has recently passed a judgment saying that there should be a 1:8 ratio of pupil-teacher ratio for children with special needs. We will take a long time to get there. Perhaps this digital teacher that we are talking about is something which could provide an even better ratio for all the 21 disabilities. There are 21 disabilities which we want to cover, but we are particularly interested in the specific learning disabilities, and also disabilities which affect the neural, the nervous system of the child. So like autism or ADHD and other such disabilities. So we are particularly interested in that. We look forward to your suggestions. The digital teacher would have to be not just IT based. I hope, I'm just wanting to clarify it. I'm sure it is very clear to you. We are looking at all digital devices. How would a digital teacher be on television, for example? Would there be a difference in the way we present the content? How will I examine or do the assessment of the child, evaluate the child through television? How will the digital teacher be on radios and podcasts? So all these things, these are unexamined areas, and if you have suggestions, we look forward. Sir had mentioned about NDR. NDR, again, our blueprint is on our website for all of you to see. Even after this, if you are able to go through the website and give us some suggestions before we submit our final report to the PMO, we would be really grateful. I think with this, I have sort of mentioned a series of asks, and we are all really looking forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Karwal, for raising some very, very important questions, right from the quality improvement of content, coherence, access to inclusion, and then integration, as Honorable PM said, blended mode, a national curriculum framework, what kind of collaborations we can do, and of course, the various avatars of digital teacher for children with special needs, and of course, the various modes that digital teachers can be used for augmenting the quality of education today. Thank you so much. Yes, we plan to cover some of these important questions definitely and submit in our report as well. So thank you so much. We will now get started with our panel discussions. So let me first request Mr. Terry Dunyan. And my question for you is as follows. Based on the address of Honorable PM today and the address by Secretary Mighty and Secretary School Education and Literacy, what, in your opinion, are the major challenges from the perspective of content creation, effective delivery of content, and of course, ease of access to quality content? And it will be great if you can, give us the answer in the framework of coherence, comprehensiveness, consistency, coverage, completeness, etc. So over to you, Terry, for your thoughts, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me here today. I think the discussion today is very important and essential in the step forward in terms of how do we shift education in India into the 21st century. That's envisioned under NEP, but also we're looking at visioning at 2047. When I think the major challenges, we look at perspectives of content creation, effective delivery of content, and ease of access to quality, I think of four things. Some of them are C's: capacity, confidence, motivation, and infrastructure. In relation to these items, all of these challenges need to be addressed. Capacity is a big one in terms of teacher capacity to be a digital teacher. Maybe my definition, how I see digital teachers is a bit different. I feel in a sense all teachers in India need to become in some way digital teachers if we're going to move this agenda forward. And it's very important to look at their capacity in terms of around creation. But I think from the Secretary, Moti, I think when he presented 3 C's, I think it's not only content creation. I agree there's a lot of content in India, good content. But there's a gap between what exists and what students are able to access. And I think we need a mechanism, and I'm not sure, it could be through Endear, it could through Diksha. You need to link the two. You mentioned the O labs at Amrita University. Amazing. I've looked at them. Developed for the Indian context based on what Indian labs look like. How do we have students access these? How do we have teachers access them? And I think it's that bridging that gulf between what exists first rather than trying to create, because creation is a long process. And I don't know if it falls to, maybe it's NCRT that provides those linkages, maybe it's mechanized in a sense, digitalized, those groupings. But I think that's essential to move forward in relation to content. Because I think developing content is not easy work. To Frank, I'm a teacher, an old school teacher. So my developing content is a bit old school. If I had to develop content now digitally without the confidence, the capacity, I'm not sure if I have the motivation. And I think these issues need to be dealt with when we're looking at all of the C's that were brought up. I think it's another question around, because it's not simply presenting content that learning happens. How do you construct the environment that supports, motivates, and enables learning? And that, I think, is so important. And I think teachers are the cornerstone. So you need to look at how do you have empowered, enabled teachers with digital literacy and tools, not for just digital learning, but for quality learning. And digital is part of the quality sort of framework. And we can't look at having digital classrooms or special classrooms or one place. We need to look at every classroom. Every teacher is enabled in some way. Every student is enabled. So it's looking at how do you connect them. Secretary Mam talked about hybrid learning. And I think, as she mentioned, there's some really good examples coming out of India in terms of, in the state level, how this is happening now. And I think developing a way to mentor teachers are able to pick this up quicker, where teachers are still challenged. Either confidence, they're not supported, or they're just not sure how to do it. So therefore, they don't. Because teachers is one of the most challenging areas to actually change. Teachers get quite entrenched. So you need that supported process to enable that. So the digital divide in content is not just access to devices and internet, it goes beyond that. It's having the right content designed in regional languages, customized to the right device. Some content, you need a screen. Some content won't fit on a mobile. So that needs to look at. And it needs to be content that's contextualized to the experience of Indian children. You can't simply bring content from outside, from the US or wherever, and assume children in rural Bihar, Gujarat will understand the context. And that needs to be looked at. And it needs to be at the development level of the child. I mentioned FLN. You really need to match content where a child is in the learning. And we know that coming out of COVID, that's going to be so essential if we're looking at addressing learning loss. How do we match that better and a way to support that? But mere technical knowledge by teachers is not equal to learning, and we know that as well. And to have effective delivery, we need to look beyond, and I think Secretary Ma mentioned this a bit, the definition of what a teacher is, digital teacher, but also the classroom. Where does learning happen? That can be delivered many places. But I think the role of teacher is quite essential in this process. So through this process, skills need to be developed. I forget to talk about integration. Integration of technology. Because when we talk about technology, we're talking about, for me, three things. How to use technology to start with, how to use it in teaching as a tool, and then how do you develop content for that process? And I think we're not doing enough in that area. So e-content, it's not easy for every teacher. So it's important to enabling, as I mentioned, empowering with tools. And then there's the dimension of, so you have teachers with capacity, they may be motivated, delivery, ease of delivery. We need to be looking at the infrastructure, the devices, the connectivity. Not just the school, but the wider learning environment. Some things can be done if you're looking at digital learning on a smartphone, but not everything. So if we're looking at seriously at shifting the digital divide and quality learning, we need to look at these aspects to really to have the capacity, the motivation, and the teachers the confidence to make digital learning or the delivery of this the normal way of teaching. And that's the shift in the now, but we need to have a sustained plan to do that moving forward, which is laid out initially in EP. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Danyan. So you did touch upon several important factors in terms of how to empower teachers. Of course, that will create a multiplier effect, access to quality content, And of course, what are the motivations for a teacher to develop that quality content? And then you talked about matching content to the recipient, and of course, the associated learning loss that we have seen during the COVID era. Of course, you also talked about bridging the digital divide and how to use technology in education, including connectivity. So we will come back to you on some of these points later on, but let me now invite Dr. Shabnam Sinha and take the discussion forward. First question for you is, how can we create institutional readiness for teacher preparations? That is, how do we further empower our teachers so that they can deliver quality education? And of course, the connected question will remain, what is the effect of pandemic on education learning loss? So over to you, Dr. Sinha.
Thank you, Professor Bose, Madam Secretary, and the panelists and other experts here. It's a very positive environment that we are functioning in it today, because this is the first time I've seen an honorable Prime Minister addressing a group of stakeholders for people to come up with action points on what needs to be happening in this context. And therefore, I would say the authorizing environment in the country is so positive and so exciting that if we can't do something now, then perhaps it will be very difficult to do something later on. Because whatever we suggest is politically very supportable. And therefore, what we need to recommend has to be practically very implementable. So what I did was, and again, with the permission of the chair, I have a quick few slides where I had brought in some practical suggestions on how to go about that so that it can go into our recommendations. If you're comfortable, I will quickly make that presentation.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So that, we have something in which we can share later on and use as a recommendation. So just wanted to, first of all, what I have been saying earlier also, are we ready, to create the digital teacher? How do we enhance service delivery? This connect between the digital teacher and the service delivery is so critical that we have to make the connect in order to create the digital teacher. I was quickly taking the key issues which the Honorable Prime Minister had raised. First, he talked about quality. I'm extremely enthused to see that the first thing he talked about was universal quality and capacity enhancement. He did not go to the digital issue first. He first talked about quality, talked about outcomes and enhancement of capacities, connecting the villages with optical fiber. Now that's something that's going to be very, very important for enhancing access. The third thing he mentioned was, how do we empower the teacher? And what Terry has also been mentioning, that the teacher empowerment is so critical to make sure that we are able to, take forward the vision of the Honorable Prime Minister or the key tenets of the budget. And service delivery, he said, dharatal par kaise leke jayenge. In fact, I wrote down what he was saying. He said, niche mein lagu kaise hoga? Dharti par kaise utare? Now that's the issue that we need to strike first at. What's the service delivery strategy we have? Inclusion, integration, he definitely talked about. He talked about schooling and skilling. How do we ensure the convergence that needs to happen? And the digital transformation to prepare a skilled workforce. So let's first come to the elephant in the room, that we have COVID, and children who are going to be about 10 years of age will have a learning poverty, in the sense that they will not be able to know what's going on in terms of digital literacy. Maybe about 70% or more of children in India are going to be below the learning poverty level. Now, these are certain impacts which were picked up by the latest documents. If you see the Boston Consulting Group, it talks about school closure in India has been almost for 2 years. You see some other countries, it would have been much less. We've done an analysis, and 40 to 70% children in India do not have a device at home. 80% teachers expressed inability to maintain emotional connect with the teachers because the divide is so profound. So what is needed, what they are mentioning, and I think this is a very important point, is let's decentralize this whole process. If school reopening needs to be done in a particular place, why does the district have to wait for the state level to tell them what to do? If they feel that, COVID is going down, schools can be opened, and how to stagger the access to the children. What are the learning constructs that can be made for blended learning? And how do you bridge the learning gaps? Now, again, I won't go too much into data, but the latest data of Pratham is again rather sobering in the sense that it says that in class 8, less than 7% children could read class 2 level text. So these are certain critical issues. Now let us come to the context. When we prepare the digital teacher, are we actually ready? On the left, you see a diet from Bihar, a district in Bihar. This is again a school from a district in UP. And since we support the government in many places, we have actual pictures. And look at a school, for example, in Bihar, there are certain areas which are flooded, some about more than 6 months in a year. So how do we ensure that there is a digital teacher over there? On the other hand, you have certain states which are so empowered. On the left side, if you see the control and command center of the Gujarat government, they have exact data on how many children have been provided home learning, what their remedial program, which is performance assessment tests, which is called PAT. They have a full data on what's going on in 2021, and therefore they have a baseline and an end line on what's required in remedial education. But if you see on the right hand side, this is a this is a classroom which we visited in Uttar Pradesh. Now there was no electricity, and there was a generator which was being run, and there was a classroom, smart classroom, which was available. Now in the smart classroom, they were making use of a dongle, and Diksha was the only available blended learning that they could make use of. And one again felt the power of this instrument Diksha, which is connecting the last mile child to what is going on at the national and global levels. So these are the kinds of disconnects that we have. Now, the digital teacher in the context of COVID, what do we need? There are certain constructs which I'll quickly present, but of course we need to cogitate more deeply on this. These are the three R's: the what, the digital teacher, the creating e-content, better learning outcomes. But the how is very important. The foundational years are going to be very critical in making sure that even at the secondary level or even at the school to work transition skilling level, we have the relevant skills to bring the children into the labor market. So the foundational years become more and more critical even for the labor market entry level skills. Now, how do we equip the teachers? The teachers have to be knowing how to make use of the instruments. But I must put on record that I was very impressed. Again, I will talk about a less developed state like Uttar Pradesh, where every teacher had been provided a handheld, every CRC had a handheld, CRC coordinator, and they were actually able to see where the kids are and what are the remedial exercises that need to be done. And some work was being done through worksheets, and some work was being uploaded on the teacher's phone through by their parents. So these are, of course, one in a kind of few experiments, but then we need to scale it up, and we need to make sure that this is happening across the board in all the schools in the country. Now for that, have we prepared our system for this kind of a shock? Now 2 years we closed down and there was nothing we could have done. But if we prepare the system for future shocks, if we prepare our frontline workers, if we prepare the head teachers to know that, okay, fine, and COVID is here to stay. There will be waves and waves that are going to come. Omicron will go, something else will come. So in that situation, what is the district level administration going to take a call? Is he going to take a call? Is she going to take a call? How does the BRC CRC coordinator function, and what does the head teacher do? So these are the kinds of readiness filters that we need to ensure. The other thing which is important even before we go to skilling is that if you look at the secondary level, completion is going down. In fact, one of the reasons why we are having to restructure our STARS program is because at the secondary level, completion has gone down from the baseline, from pre-COVID baseline at the secondary level. So getting those who have dropped out at the secondary level, those who are out of school back into schools is going to be very critical. And school to work transition strategies will be important. That if a child is not going to go to higher education, if a student doesn't want to go to higher education, what strategies do we have so that after school they can go immediately into the labor market? And here there are two critical points: digital enablement and enabling the frontline workers. Now, I will come to a very critical point, which we have been discussing, and I think the government is already working on it, that the district has to be made the focal point. Now, since you asked me to talk a little bit about skilling, I would want to mention here that the role of the collector as a convergent point of action becomes very important at the district level. With the Ministry of Skills Development, we have a project called Sankalp, and under that we have developed what are called district skill development plans. These are made by district skill development committees, which has representation from the district employment agency, from the district industry bodies, from the district industry department, and from the stakeholder, and from the parents, and from the youth themselves. So therefore they talk to each other and they decide how do we connect the local youth with the local industry. Therefore, schooling and skilling should not be done in a vacuum. We need to understand what are the local requirements. So the contextuality of skilling becomes very critical. We also need to know what are the migration patterns. Are there more migrants coming or are migrants going out? If there is outward migration, we can prepare our youth to follow the trajectory where the migration is happening. And there's another important point here, that skills have to be made now relevant to post-COVID requirements. So can we ensure that at the school level, skills are made aspirational, also COVID responsive? So we are not talking of construction in industry, we are talking of healthcare, trying to create the workforce for healthcare where students can become a very important force to draw on. Can we look at technology relevant skills? Logistics, for example, if you see the e-commerce which is happening, none of us go to the markets now. We have everything on Amazon and other e-commerce platforms. That's important, and green jobs are going to be very critical. So there is an important element which I again wanted to bring in here, and we've tried to build that connect with the Ministry of Education also, with the sector skill councils. There are sector skill councils for each particular sector. Can we try to ensure that these sector skill councils are connected at the district level, perhaps even at the state level, to ideally identify what are the sectors that are present in your state, and then accordingly provide the skills required in the school level. And the GRID concept, which is now a global concept, and the World Bank is focusing a lot on it, which is green, resilient, inclusive development, which I think the Honorable Prime Minister also mentioned. We need to look at, solar panels. And this is something, again, which children we found are very, very excited about. Now, we did a quick socio-economic landscape. This is something which would be useful for the government to do for each state. We did this for UP. And we try to identify what are the sectors present over there, what are the diminishing sectors, and what are the sectors which are going up. So these kinds of sectoral analysis would also be very critical. But coming to the point on how we are going to move on this, we should look at a prioritization and sequencing. We can't do all of it in one go. Let us make that very clear. And one of the reasons why Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan started floundering was because it was rolled out all across in all districts, all schools in one go. It's very important to start smaller and then scale up. So a short-term immediate would be, and I would compliment what the government because they're already working on it, select a group of districts which are which are having difficulties, which are low performing, but ideally combine them with a high performing district so that there is knowledge sharing and learning. And then this is a short term, immediate requirement. Let's embed all the strategies into these districts and see how they perform. Then we move on to embed these into policy instruments. When we've learned at the cost of these shorter term in the district level, we embed these into policy instruments and perhaps ask for the next budget could actually help us do this. And then in the longer term, we scale it across the country. Now, COVID-19 has, and this I picked up from Ezekiel, that, it's a gray rhino and a black swan event happening at the same time. So the black swan event is COVID-19, where we now have foregone learning, that is 2 years of learning foregone, 2 years of learning forgotten. But also the fact is that the gray rhino was already, pouncing on us in the sense that the learning deficits were already there. So therefore, what is needed now is to respond right now. Do right now what should have been done already. So with that, I'll just stop here, and we can of course discuss more as we move along. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and we can hand over to you, Professor Bose.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha, for summarizing it so well. So you touched upon some very, very important point, right from the service delivery strategy to the on-the-ground reality. We can discuss all that we want sitting in the comforts of these rooms, but at the ground, you gave us some examples of real schools in Bihar and UP and what difficulties and challenges they are facing in terms of also learning poverty levels and how to bridge the last mile problem. Plus, you mentioned a couple of things regarding the COVID and the fallouts of COVID and what are the readiness filters required for next disruptions. And also, how do we focus on skills at the district level and contextuality of skilling, plus post-COVID aspirational skills, of course, the grid concept, and of course, a very nice analogy of the black swan plus a green rhino event and the need to respond right now. So thank you so much for covering those points. Let me move on with the discussion and invite my experts at this moment in time and pose certain questions to them. So let me first request Professor Partha Pratim Chakrabarty, and my question to you, coming from the discussion so far, is from the skilling perspective. So Professor Chakrabarty, in your opinion, what concrete steps should be taken to align the end-to-end supply chain, right from skilling to employability? And of course, how do we make content delivery more effective so that more students can benefit from it? Over to you, Professor Chakrabarty.
Thank you, Professor Bose. It was nice listening to all the others. Now, as Srimati Shabnam Sinha has just mentioned, we are running 100 meters, a middle distance, and a long distance in parallel. And if we are to do all these three, we have to have a platform and a strategy which enables us to do that. Now, in order to do that, where we have to solve the skilling to employability, the knowledge to the education to skilling, and the knowledge to education, which are the three levels of short sprint, middle distance, and long distance, my suggestion would be that we start building a digital platform, which is a convergence platform. Already NDR is there, all there. But I'll tell you what are the components we need for our case for the problem that we have stated. The first thing that we need is an encyclopedia, a digital encyclopedia. And here I just don't mean content. I mean programs, I mean infrastructure, I mean the whole information encyclopedia. And as the Honorable Prime Minister just mentioned, this is a convergence platform. A lot of information is available already. We have to use AI, ML, and curation, as Secretary Maiti mentioned, to try and build this encyclopedia. This encyclopedia can be accessed in many ways by many people. So the next concept that we need to build is connect the people. And the people here, from students to teachers to facilitators, and as Shabnam also just mentioned, is that there is a larger chain other than just teachers and students to bridge the skilling gap. So we again need the set of people. Once we have these two in place, which I think should be there in the digital platform, then we need a platform for assessment, gap identification, and recommendation. So now what is assessment? Assessment just does not mean my skilling assessment. It also means which curriculum is missing, which course is missing, which student is missing what. And then, as the Secretary Anita ji mentioned, it's about the friction. What sort of friction, whether it is a learning disability friction, whether it's a device accessibility friction. So you have to have a mechanism of assessment. And this will be again a set of tools which can be put in this converged platform. From this, you will get gaps. Multiple gaps will come out for multiple people. And then you will get recommendations. The recommendations can be institutional. The recommendations can be individual or personalized. The recommendations may be for a targeted goal of learning a particular subject. And the recommendations can be for a school or everything else. So all these are very standard AI/ML technologies that are there today. And I believe that if we put all of this in place quickly and have it work at different speeds for all the different races that we are trying to do, we will be succeeding. As Secretary Mehti said, this platform should have a single sign-on. It must be a convergence platform where we can have everybody together. But in order to have this platform, we need two more things, which the speakers before me talked about, is an observatory. There is from individuals for self-learning to teachers to the administrators, everybody should be able to see what is happening out here. And we should be able to really identify the interventions from this observatory. And the platform should enable, today we are buying platforms, devices from millions of places. I believe that India should make its own open source, inclusive, multilingual platform of its own, instead of just taking software from everywhere else. And I think that should be part of this program. The last point that I have is that we should also make our own devices that with the India chip, with the semiconductor, at least we can set standards for the devices that we need. And from a student from lower school, they can just go like a mechano set, like they play. So this whole device, stack can be made, and it's all part of Make in India program. It will become a huge economy of its own. And therefore, we want to make a platform where the best information, content, people can connect and percolate to the others. For this, as we have been pointing out, we need not only such platforms and access and infrastructure, we need training, but we also need funding. And in order to meet this funding, I would suggest that the secretaries may kindly approach the government to enable CSR funding for anybody who contributes to this. Once you enable CSR funding for anybody who contributes to this, I think we will gain sufficient funding. So with this, my request is, please build up this platform which can run at multiple speeds and multiple paces. And today's AI/ML technology, for which at least I have done some background study and research, and the National Digital Library, which also I run, the virtual labs that you have, all of this can be enabled even much better with what we have. We can start and curate what is already available into this platform and then build up slowly. So with this, I make my short recommendation. I will request you all to consider this. I can elaborate further on this at various points as and when needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chakraborty, for giving a very practical perspective from the implementation point of view. You made a very good analogy about a 100-meter middle distance in a marathon, multiple speed, multiple distance approach. So clearly one size doesn't fit all. Plus you talked about a convergence platform, a creation of a digital encyclopedia with a need to connect people along the value chain, which will do assessment, gap analysis, and recommendation. Of course, this recommendation can be done more efficiently using AI ML-based techniques. You talked about device accessibility, learning disability creating friction, and also the need for multilingual platform. Of course, you made a case for CSR funding, and of course, the initiatives to make in India, including making our own devices. Thank you so much for those crisp recommendations. So let us see from the other perspective, and let me invite Ms. Kirti Seth from NASSCOM and look at the question from the other side of the table. So Ms. Seth, here is the question for you. Let us focus on learning outcomes. In your opinion, how is the concept of digital teacher going to make an impact on better learning outcomes? And in the same light, what do you think is the role the digital infrastructure should play here? Over to you, Ms. Seth.
Thanks so much. It's been a very interesting discussion thus far, and a lot of the points that I really wanted to make have been covered. But I'll try and come up with something different. So before I jump into how digital teacher is going to make an impact for better learning outcomes, I just wanted to say, what am I thinking of when I'm talking about the digital teacher? Thinking of it in two perspectives. So one is, of course, the idea of using digital technologies for learners to learn and be tested on their own, because that's one of the biggest things that's happened over this pandemic, where a lot of self-learning has started to come about. But on the other side is that how do we enable teachers to use the digital technology to improve digital learning outcomes faster and at scale? So at the core of using technology for either purpose is that it must lead to better learning outcomes for more and more learners. Also wanted to take a little bit of a different view to what, not different, I would say additional view to what the speakers before me have said, where a lot of the focus has been about how do we make this happen at the bottom of the pyramid, where we talk about access, where we talk about for all those learners who have lost all this time over the pandemic, and the fact that we had the grey rhino right before, where we had a lot to do anyway. But India has two levels of learning going on. We have one, what we talked about, what we saw thus far, but we also have the whole higher education system, which is talking about where we talk about this end-to-end building employability, is how do we make that work better as well? And that we are already along the curve. So when we talk of the short-term sprint that we need to run, perhaps that's one place to attack to see an immediate outcome of what we want to do. So when we talk about using technology, we have to apply new approaches. We can't think about, we can't think of 20th century methods to 21st century reality. I think the Prime Minister kept mentioning that. And so to recognize that the knowledge of the world is in the hands of every learner today. That smartphone, that phone that you have, you're accessing whatever you want to access whenever you want. So when we think of building content, when we think of providing technology to teachers, or when we think of designing content, we need to think about how are they adding value to whatever content is already freely available. As soon as you move to curation from creation, you realize that you're ready to leverage anything that is available thus far. So then what is it that the human teacher needs to do to enhance the value of the digital content? Enough ideas have been given in the speakers before me on how to improve the quality of content. And I agree with Terry where he says that it's very hard creating content. So it requires a lot of resources, it requires a lot of expertise, it needs time. And the whole idea of bringing it together, converging to a digital platform where these things will be universally available, is quite a unique idea if we think about it. I mean, if you think of any other country and say, are they using public digital platforms the way we are in India? I think we are pretty much leaps ahead in terms of the world of how we have leveraged public digital platforms. And the suggestion that we think of a public digital platform where these things can converge, where we have things like single sign-on, where we have completeness, where we have searchability. Because information asymmetry is currently a huge problem. I'm even talking about it in our world. I come from NASSCOM, where the IT industry is there, where we've taken training to a whole different level, but yet we know so little of what is out there. I heard Ms. Karwal talk about what all is available. I'm going to go back and read about it. And every time I'm in a forum like this, I recognize how much we already have in the country. So that convergence piece, bringing it to a platform, is crucial. So digital infrastructure in that sense becomes really important. I'm not addressing so much the devices to the learners today, because I thought that that is one problem that we are going to address, but I also want to talk about how to teach. It's because the what to teach is available aplenty, but how do you bring it together in an accessible, searchable form is going to be the key. And that's a massive shift on how a digital teacher is going to be different from someone who is teaching today. The other point I wanted to touch upon was again something that the Prime Minister touched upon, was on world-class learning outcomes. If we're going to look at world-class learning outcomes, we have to have world-class resources. And those world-class resources are only going to be built if we take an ecosystem, collaborative approach to building this content. Technology allows us to build these ecosystems. So what we need to do is design funding and incentivization models that will allow this co-creation to happen on its own. We have traditionally looked at push-based mechanisms when we think of things that the government is doing and how it is being driven in the various systems that we create. But with the advent of this whole thought process of the UPI thought process, or the National Digital Healthcare Platform process, India Stack is talking about enabling this technology so that ecosystem players come and ride on it and then provide what is required. But they will only provide what is required if the right incentives are available, if the right motivation is available. So bringing in institutions and content providers who are best in class to collaborate and create universally available content would be one thing. Reduce the information asymmetry. I think that's crucial, absolutely crucial, letting people know what is available. And this dramatically increasing the speed of new content creation and new course rollout, because it's very hard to create excellent content. So until you bring everyone together to do what they do best and leverage this collective adoption of this content, which increases the ROI on this effort crazily, because now you have a platform where it's available, where it's searchable, it's superbly designed, and designed in a way that teachers can add value. Secretary Meti referred to the Future Skills Prime platform, which is the collaboration between Meti and NASSCOM, which is the IT industry. And the biggest thing that we have learned over there is that people will come to a platform, people will start learning, but to take them across the finish line, you do need that human intervention. So design in such a way that the human intervention is built in, that value add is available, the different modes of delivery. Technology allows you to have different modes of delivery. And then comes the assessments, which is the beauty about assessments in this kind of a platform approach, is that you have all this data available to you. So take data-driven decisions on where the content is falling short, where the learning outcomes are not being delivered, where do we need to intervene to improve this. There was this talk of adaptive learning mechanisms. Absolutely true. And Dr. Chakrabarti had mentioned using AI and ML. We can do this today. So think about micro-credentials, build stackable credits. So you encourage learners. So on the one hand, you provide world-class content. On the other hand, you encourage learners to come in and take bite-sized chunks of this content, stackable credits. A digital platform enables all this to happen. So if I were to conclude, I think it's not just about technology coming in to enable teachers to deliver. It is also to learn themselves and completely change the way they teach. I do believe that the one service that the pandemic has done is to remove this whole mindset barrier. I think Terry touched upon it, and I think Dr. Karwal also touched upon it, saying that this whole thing about digitally enabled teaching and learning used to be a big mindset, a big barrier. The pandemic has said no longer. We've discovered in absolute concrete terms how this can actually be used, and it's time to capitalize on this paradigm, build this infrastructure which is universally accessible and measures outcomes not just in an assessment, in a lag indicator, which is the assessment, but also lead indicators, because how you're consuming the content, how you're what parts of the content you're using, what does it lead to in terms of the assessments. Today, the data tools allow us to do all that, and that becomes a beautiful continuous improvement cycle where digital content, digital teacher, digital infrastructure all combines for an iterative improvement cycle.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Seth, for throwing some light on the very important topic. So let me quickly summarize. You started off with saying that, look, we cannot use 20th century methods for 21st century problems. And then you touched upon a very important point that curation is very, very important, and we should take a cautious decision about curation versus creation of more content. You touched upon information asymmetry and how convergence is important on this uniform platform, a UPI-like environment for education. You, of course, talked about the need for building in human intervention into this whole concept of digital teachers, and also the importance of data-driven decision as to where to add additional content. Plus, you talked about micro-credentials, bite-sized contents, in fact, a different kind of learning environment, which is kind of the micro-learning environment in today's day and age. So that brings us to the next very important question about really the concept of deep skilling and deep learning, the concept of teaching versus learning. So let me bring in a slightly different perspective by inviting Professor Mangal Sundar. And Professor Mangal Sundar, here is a question for you in the context of the discussion that has already been held. How do we bridge the gap between deep skilling and deep learning? And how effectively and quickly do we move from teaching to learn, that is pedagogy process, to learning to learn, that is andragogy process? Over to you, Professor Mangal Sundar.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Ranjan. Am I audible?
Yes, yeah. Loud and clear.
Okay. Thanks to all of you, the experts and the distinguished members. I have these questions since 1999, when I was first introduced to technology enhanced learning through a workshop in IIT Madras. And I am very happy that over 23 years I'm learning still. Therefore, it's a learning to learn from me, which I will share with you. It's a long process. It's not going to be short and very quick and time-bound. It's a continuous process. I have several roles suggested to the ministry and also to the technologists, teachers, and others. So let me read out some of these roles in terms of skilling from learning. And the agencies may be replaced by the corresponding bodies in school education. I'm familiar with higher education, therefore I will mention the agencies from the higher education side, but the methodology is the same. The first point I would request everyone to think about is to request all the education partners to revise the curricula. And this has to be done with some implementation from the AICT, UGC, Medical Council, agricultural bodies. I mean, we are talking about digital learning. We are not talking about engineering or science or technology. We're talking about learning. Therefore, all sectors, the corresponding regulatory and implementation bodies, please encourage education partners to revise the curricula on an urgent basis and provide for small but significant credits and training and supported internships for every student over in one of the future skills with the domain specificity. Quite obviously, IT student in computer science will have a different domain expertise for the same IoT, which an agricultural engineer in the agricultural sector will have. Domain specificity is very important. this is possible. Similar thing with the data science and data analytics, for example. These are all the subject areas, but now into deep skilling. They mean different emphasis for different areas. If you think about chemistry, which is what I teach, it has to do with molecules and property databases. In physics, it's a different thing. And in biology, it may refer to microbes and organisms and databases with respect to that. And in medicine, agriculture, law, everywhere, it's different. Therefore, different ministerial bodies have to come together to bring revisions and a large number of domain-specific experts to be involved. Content is something that we are all very familiar with. The processes and the outcomes, we need to have a national perspective. This is number one. Second point I would like the ministry and others to think about, please identify major industry partners in each sector. We are talking about skilling. We are not talking about only learning. With the help of the ministry, for example, MIT and Telecom Ministry or Power Sector Ministry, we need to provide training incentives to these industries for outcome-based and successful employment of graduates. Therefore, whether it's a training in Tally or Excel for commerce or a banking sector, or digital copyrights management and other things for IT in law, or any other, every industrial body must be put on top gear. And it is important for the government to allocate funds through whatever means, the CSR of the industry or others, so that the methods should be mobilized to the respective sectors. We have enormous number of institutions and a very large talent pool. Therefore, I believe that the beneficiary in the process is the employer also and the employed. So government sectors and industries really have to put together. I'll give you the model at the end, which I'm working on. The third is, of course, identify the state regulatory and empowering bodies. Now we are going down from the centralized educational processes and digital to go back to the individual state levels where possible training and skilling in the local language. This is what I think Professor Partho also mentioned and the previous speakers also did. It is not enough that we have communication skills in English, but it's very, very important to have the technology tools mesh with the local requirements and the local talents. Please remember, when we do this sincerely, it creates a whole new paradigm that could be helpful to all the students in India. The fourth issue I would request everyone to think about is that the intermediate learners and teachers, most importantly, can be empowered through the creation of new academies. Mr. Chani talked about the ICT Academy. I'm familiar with it because I'm one of the reviewers of the ICT Academy for the last 6 years. That's a good model in terms of providing intermediate stages for empowering a large-scale faculty level training. The academy is a model for IT and ICT, but similar technology academies have to be created in various other sectors as well. They have to interface with the IT ministry in terms of tools of IT, but individual learning processes and training and skilling in respective ministries they have to be owned by the respective bodies, academic bodies and the ministry. Therefore, it is important that each institution be required to create a professional and a small sustainable office for interacting with such programs and work with these ICT academies if they are equivalents, which will be peer reviewed and supported. This is another way by which we can improve from deep learning, which the universities are supposed to give, to the deep skilling, which will lead to employment sector and employment utilities. I'm sorry, I'll just cut this off. The other most important and urgent exercise that all of us have to worry about in terms of pedagogy is tagging what we already have, as content in a very serious way, so that it doesn't have to be content in India. It can be the open educational resources that the UNESCO has very, very thoroughly addressed since 2001. And we have to have a Google Map-like strategy for locations and endpoints deciding the possible routes of the journey. That's the analogy. which I would say the journey that the student wants to take to where he or she wants to go, the background that she has, which is his or her location, I think that journey has to be determined by the academics and by the industries by tagging the educational content that we have. We have an enormous body of information from NPTEL. We have an enormous body of information from various other projects, the SWAYAM, and virtual labs has created a whole new laboratory domains where the hands-on is required. Therefore, tagging them such that a route map is available the moment student says, I have this, I want to go here, click, and then multiple routes appear and multiple course contents can be made available. Where there is a gap, the teacher can go in and build that particular gap. And therefore, the content mapping and a sort of a Google mapping is very, very important for building a digital world, which is truly a digital world for the student. Digital was discovered in 20th century. Teaching is going on for several hundreds of years, and digital teaching and digital learning in the 21st century has to come together with all these processes. Therefore, these are my specific points with respect to both pedagogy as well as andragogy. But I would like to conclude with the following remark. All of this has been thought about, except that we have a different medium, we have a different interface, but the philosophy of teaching and learning and andragogical methods has been long, long ago talked about. Let me read out that. Please remember, as teachers, we are only, we are not instructors generally. We are not taskmasters. We are basically helpers and guides. Our business is to suggest and not to impose. And therefore, it is we don't train the pupil's mind. I mean, this is all adopted from Aurobindo's saying. This is, we don't train the pupil's mind. We only show the student how to perfect the knowledge. And therefore, we show how to acquire the knowledge for the student himself. Thank you. And I will be very happy to answer any specific questions. I do have some communication problems. I hope the presentation was without any error. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Mangal Sundar. No, your communication was absolutely perfect. You touched upon some very important points, right from the need for curriculum revision in terms of having small but significant credits, and also the need to involve industry partners both for skilling and training, and perhaps CSR funds can be allocated to it, something Secretary Maiti also talked about in terms of collaboration. Then you also touched upon skilling and successful employment, as well as empowering the states and the districts so as to have training in local languages, which is very, very important. Another practical suggestion you made about having some offices in every institute and also empower teachers to improve their skills through various academies. Finally, you gave a very nice example about navigating the world of education like Google Maps. We should be able to tag and map all the content and rich content available not only in India but across the globe, and see how the students can chart out a journey for themselves in the academic world. So thank you so much. But that brings us to the more important question, if we start peeling the onion, is how the real learning takes place. Yes, we can create wonderful content and we get teachers involved, but what is that key thing behind, what is the prana behind learning? And let me invite at this stage Professor Rajiv Sangal, and where I think he will share with us a very interesting perspective. So Professor Sangal, this is a question for you. What are the major enablers for the efficacy of the teaching learning from interpersonal perspective? That is, does the bond between the teacher and the student, or for example, student and student, peer learning, or the role of parents in that whole ecosystem for learning? So over to you, Professor Sangal.
Thank you, Professor Bose, for posing these questions. My earlier, both panelists as well as expert members made my job a little easier in outlining the role of technology, the content, and how all these things need to be integrated. Before jumping into the question, I also wanted to mention about language and content being available in our own, language of the learners. So there is a national mission on translation. So National Language Translation Mission, which is designed to give automatic translation tools in a whole host of Indian languages. 15 to begin with, and then of course go to 22, and then later beyond that. My own background is artificial intelligence, natural language processing. I've worked in this for last 40 years. But I'm going to take a different position here. We should understand what role technology can play and what role it cannot play, either because it is not developed sufficiently enough, or there might be even other reasons about emotional connect and so on. So even while building the automatic translation tools, we said we will provide for human intervention, because translation tools will not be perfect, and the translations they produce, the work that they do, while useful, would need to be curated, would need to be corrected by human translators. So that is the approach. Now think about education, which is a much, much larger enterprise. Now here, whatever content we provide, and today, yes, we do provide not just text, we provide video lectures, audio lectures, pictures, animation, and whatnot. But when there is a specific learning difficulty that a student faces, I'm afraid that technology is not of much use. The student can be asked to listen to the lecture again or to read the book again in the earlier era, but the student comes back and says, no, I don't understand. The learning difficulty which is specifically faced by the student has to be solved by a human being, by a teacher who understands not just the content, but also understands the difficulty that the student is having. Now, my experience is higher education for last 40 years. However, for last 2 years, I have personally been involved with teaching in school on a voluntary basis, just to understand what is going on in this COVID times. And I have also observed some exceptional teachers doing online teaching. And it is the connect of the student with the teacher that is extremely important. And it is particularly so at the level of the school. So once this bond between teacher and student is in place, the student feels confident in asking questions, in sharing his or her weaknesses, and telling about his or her imagination. And this connect allows this dynamic thing to take place, which the technology, I'm afraid, is not going to provide a solution for. Therefore, we need to build, while building technology, we have to provide a very strong tools, facilities, training of teachers, so that the bond between the teacher and the student can be built. And once this bond is built, then the teacher can participate effectively in online digital education. Without that, I'm afraid it will not succeed. Now, content by itself might work for some time, but it will not reach the levels or what we want. Our aspirations, of course, are much higher for education. Another issue is students learn a lot from each other. That is peer learning. Now, how do we allow peer learning in online education? What I noticed in the last 2 years, that the teacher and the student get connected. However, when it is a thing about student-to-student connection, they asking questions to each other, discussing, it does not take place. And we need to rethink how technology can enable it, but even more importantly, how the teachers can play a role in doing this. It may mean organizing the class into smaller groups of 2 or 3 who work together, who make presentations together, and they talk to each other. And in a class, so if there are, let's say, if the class has 30 students in a school, and you have, online interaction between teacher and student becomes extremely difficult. But if you form the groups of 3 students each, then the teacher is interacting with 10 such groups only. And the groups themselves interact with each other. So it improves not just the teacher-student connect, it also allows peer learning to take place with each other. Now, with this, with the digital education and what we have seen and I've seen in COVID, there is a role of parents that is absolutely crucial. Some of the online classes which were taking place, I saw that where the parents were aligned, the learning was exponentially different, extremely good. And the parents get involved, and not just during the class, but also in supporting the child beyond the classroom. They hopefully can provide an environment. Uh, Another thing, this open classroom, the digital classroom also happens to be the open classroom where the teacher doesn't know who all are watching him or her. Uh, it also helps the teacher maintain the cool and avoid outbursts, which actually destroy the linkage between the teacher and the student. So, this new environment that is coming, we need to think about it holistically. And I'm sure that the technology that needs to be developed is yet to be developed, which will support the teacher, the student and student interaction. And we should be very cognizant of that. And while doing so, I hope that digital education will be a very big step forward. But it will be a step forward only if we are able to keep the student and the teacher at the center and parent in a supporting role. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sangal, for adding a very, very unique perspective. You did start with your experience with the National Language Translation Mission, and then came on to say that what technology can do and what it cannot, and we must know our limitations. One of the things that technology, by definition, cannot do is become human, although there are talks of artificial intelligence. But really, if we have to make education really effective, we need to bring in the aspect of peer-to-peer learning as well as the role of parents as big enablers and strengthening this open classroom architecture that is coming up, especially in the post-COVID era. So your suggestion, of course, is to develop and augment technology, somehow taking into view how to enable and augment peer learning and helping teachers to involve students in a supportive role. So thank you, Professor Sangal, for bringing out that unique perspective. Now, coming back to a more practical aspect, let me bring in here Dr. Vyas, and he will perhaps be able to shed some lights on one of the very important aspects for today's panel discussion, which deals with virtual labs. As all of you know, virtual labs is a paradigm shift in student-centric education. I myself have been involved with the development of virtual labs as the national coordinator at the higher education level, but a whole new set of virtual labs are being created at the school level. So my question to Dr. Vyas is as follows. Can you please shed some light on this important concept of virtual labs, its architecture, some of the components, its relevance to digital learning, and of course, what are the real challenges for executing these virtual labs? Over to you, Dr. Vyas.
Thank you, Professor Ranjan. I will touch upon the virtual labs, its requirements, infrastructure, architecture, and why they are required. Because virtual labs have been mentioned as one of the important components in the budgetary proposal also. So briefly, I will touch upon this. Amid the pandemic, educational sector was among the most affected sectors. The teachers had to quickly adopt to digital tools and technologies to conduct the online classes and meet the aspirations of the students. The reliance on digital platform for teaching and learning has also seen a phenomenal rise. The concept of digital teacher has gained significant momentum in this digital era where online is a new normal. It has
been well acknowledged that an effective digital teacher is a combination of technology, experience, knowledge, and skills. In this paradigm, shift from conventional classroom teaching to online learning, virtual lab has emerged as an important component of the digital teaching and learning process. I have prepared a few slides. I would like to discuss this. I already said what is digital teacher. So digital teacher is who imparts knowledge and develops skills using innovative digital tools and technologies. Next. It is a combination of technology, experience, knowledge, and skills. And what is virtual lab? Now, virtual lab for digital learning. Virtual labs, they provide complete e-learning management system using state-of-the-art computer simulation technology to demonstrate experiments in virtual disciplines. That is what the role of the virtual lab is. If you can have a science lab, you can have the skill lab, and then you also can have a technology tools in this. It also contains science, technology, and humanities labs. Next. Now, what is the objective of this virtual lab? The objective is to provide service as visual aid to teach complete concepts. That is what the first objective is. The second objective is to offer interactive virtual platform to uplift skills by performing experiments. So you can perform experiments using the virtual lab. You can also do simulation. So simulation-based labs in various disciplines to address the need of inclusivity. Then we also have the facility of augmentation. So you can have augmented reality-based laboratories to enhance the learning outcomes. Then you can have the capture imagination of learners and initiate critical thinking. That is what the objective of the virtual lab is. The virtual lab for digital learning is, it can have school lab for experiments, virtual assessment platforms, information and visualization labs with augmented and virtual reality. It can also have e-learning applications, and they are all in multilingual with multilingual support. Now, virtual lab for schooling. You require animation-based virtual labs where learning through non-interactive means like videos, animations, storylines, comics, etc. are provided. Then the other part is simulation-based virtual labs where learning through interactive contents like dynamic models, performing experiments on real-time virtual objects and others are also provided. The virtual lab will have virtual assessment platforms. This could be, which will have interactive questionnaires, interactive 3D models, and also simulation lab. This will also be in multilingual facilities with virtual assessment platforms. Virtual lab for digital learning. This will have information and visualization labs with AR and VR labs. This lab provides students to experience the real world objects in the 2D real environment, where we use AR and VR tools. E-learning apps can also be applied in virtual labs, where e-learning could be audio-video based applications, and it can also have sign-based e-learning apps. They are mainly meant for hearing impairment students who are suffering from hearing impairment. So this facility can also be developed. So the e-learning apps will include recorded video contents, provision of interactive session, and simulation-based exercises. Now, what are the resources required? You need subject matter experts to handle the virtual labs, script writers and reviewers, 2D and 3D animators, technology content creators. You also need delivery platforms for this, where web and mobile applications are required, satellite channels, DTH, etc. should also be there, and then you can do it through FM radio. The technologies which normally will be required for creating this kind of virtual labs will be access technology. Either you can have internet or satellite or FC or even FM. You need storage medium. It could be cloud or server based. Content design could be in 2D or 3D models. Visualization technology, either AR or VR, and open source platform. You also need open source platform for doing this. Now, what is the way ahead? Standardization of architecture is very much required. Last mile connectivity to learners, alignment with prospective OFC or cellular 4G or 5G plan, entity under Government of India to monitor rollout and e-governance policy, identify and nominate universities or institutions of national importance as knowledge consultants and partners, inclusivity and multilingual support, adoption and validation of assessment into examination policy, coordination with institutes like BISEC, ISRO, etc., orientation sessions or training programs of new learners to use the virtual lab. That also is very much required, because when you create teachers for handling virtual labs, you need to train them on regular basis. So that training also is equally important, so that they can perform their role in the most effective manner. So this is what I wanted to touch upon. A large number of labs are required, as mentioned in the budget. I think what is mentioned is around 750 such virtual labs will be required in the country. So each lab can be configured in the surroundings. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vyas, for educating the viewers on the virtual labs. You did start with online being the new normal, and then you mentioned about the major objectives of virtual labs. And then you looked at how we can use augmented reality, VR, etc., to strengthen the delivery of virtual labs for skilling, for education, and augmenting the knowledge. Plus, we can use videos, animation, etc., to further create the effectiveness and efficacy of virtual labs. You also emphasized upon the need for open source and the need for standardization of architecture. And what are the infrastructural requirements for proliferation of these labs? So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on it. Taking this discussion towards a conclusion, we have to now ask a very, very important question about digital inclusion. We have talked about inclusions of all other kinds, including language and region, but digital inclusion. So at this point, I would like to invite Mr. Abhishek Singh and pose a very important question in terms of the need to augment the reach of the online learning, right from spreading out to rural schools to increasing the efficacy itself of the Swayam Prabha TV channels under the PM eVidya initiative. So, Mr. Abhishek Singh, here is the question for you. How can we create quality content for the 200 new educational TV channels of Swayam Prabha as announced in the Union Budget 2022? Over to you, Abhishek.
Thank you, Ranjan, and I hope I'm audible.
Loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay. So, in fact, a lot has been said, and in fact, this webinar has been very, very enlightening, and we have covered almost all aspects related to what we should be doing for digital teachers and how online education and building up capacities in content as well as in teaching can really help. So I will just quickly, since we are almost nearing the end of the session also, I'll quickly touch upon a few aspects with regard to how the Swayam Prabha TV channels can ensure inclusion and can ensure that access to quality content is made available across the nook and corner of the country even before the BharatNet project is completed. So as we know, the Swayam Prabha TV channels, the DTH TV channels, are currently operational with, I believe, around 34 channels which are delivering quality content generated by various sources, by NCRT, by the Swayam, by Diksha, by NPTEL. All this content is streamed on the DTH channels in various parts of various schools, and a lot of students benefit from them, especially those students who don't have access to a device, a smartphone, or a laptop, or a computer, or connectivity. And this imparts quality education through the channels. Now, the budget speech says it mentions that one class, one channel, and 200 new DTH channels are to be created. So this will ultimately mean that we will be covering all classes from probably class 1 to 10 or 12, and maybe all languages will be covered. So the content will be required to be created in multiple languages across the length and breadth of the country on almost all subjects. But when we do that content, how do we do that? How do we get the people to create that content in various languages? So some of the content which is already available can of course be made available through either language technologies, as Professor Sangal was mentioning about NLTM tools, or getting teachers, quality teachers, to deliver those lectures. And when we do that, one way could be to identify maybe the national award-winning teachers from across the length and breadth of the country and give them a device, give them access to a studio and produce that content. And when we create content for this channel, it should not be just recording a normal class. It should be recorded in a professional manner with all the tools and techniques which are required, just like it should be at no less in quality than maybe a edX lecture or a Coursera lecture. So that would require setting up studios across the country. That would require skilling the teachers who will be imparting these lectures, and then recording it and ensuring that the quality meets the criteria. Then another thing which is very interesting, which you have seen in several sessions, and what Professor Pathak also mentioned in the paper that he submitted in email, is that very often long lectures on a TV or an online mode doesn't engage the learners, and learning outcomes get impacted after a few minutes of learning. So can we think of, instead of having 30-minute or 40-minute lectures, can we think of making smaller capsule, 8 to 10-minute capsule? Khan Academy does that very well, and ensure that we have some kind of gamification, even though the learning is happening on a TV channel and two-way communication not possible. But if we have some kind of gamification, so that after a concept is taught on a TV channel also, then there are some questions which are asked. There can be several ways in which it can be done. It can be a converted Crorepati model also. If some questions are asked by the anchor, and the people who are participating, the students who are learning at home or in school with a TV, can actually respond to that on their pen or paper in whichever form they can. And whoever is assisting them, whether it's the parents or whether it's the teachers, can keep a record of that, so that the learning outcomes is also measured and the quality of the learning through a DTH channel is not impacted. The same things can be thought of, like when we talk about digital teachers, what we are trying to do with the DTH channel can also be done through podcast videos, because very often you find that even access to television is not there all over, and the kind of service which community radio is especially playing can also be leveraged for imparting lessons in several parts of the country. We all remember that so many things we heard first on radio, and those memories are etched, especially when we were growing up. If we can leverage that, especially for places who do not have broadband connectivity or a fiber connectivity, it can really, really help. Over and above that, along with the Swayam Prabha channels, I'd like to just mention a few points with regard to ensuring quality connectivity. Well, like BharatNet is being planned, 600,000 villages are to be covered, almost 200,000 villages have already been done. But when we are implementing BharatNet, very often we are just looking at the metric of number of villages which are connected. For the point of education, if we can kind of see how many of our primary schools and how many of middle schools are covered, the BharatNet should not happen that the fiber is terminated at the boundary of the village and we say the village is connected. Like what used to happen with the village public telephones at a very long point of time, when one telephone would mean that which would be installed at the village sarpanch's house or something, will mean the village is connected. So when we are taking BharatNet, we must see that all the educational institutions are connected. And over and above that, I would also like to mention even the Anganwadi centers need to be connected, because in the new NEP, the curriculum, the learnings from ages 3 to 6 will be the responsibility of the education department. But if the learning is being imparted at the Anganwadi center, that Anganwadi center needs to be connected, so that that is to be given at an early age, And if to address the lack of a trained teacher, that can also be done at the Anganwadi center. The other issue that we need to think, especially during the pandemic, what we observed was the digital haves and have-not. In cities and urban centers, we find that our children had access to multiple devices, multiple means to access online education. But in the rural area, it was really a challenge. In fact, we came across some students wherein one phone was shared by four siblings, and they could divide the time, and they were very thankful for a platform like Diksha because that allowed them to print hours by staggered hours by using that device. But that also brings to the point that should we not think of a PLI scheme for manufacturing low-cost tablets which can be used for students? We are focusing a lot on electronics manufacturing in Ministry of Electronics and IT, and this is a requirement which is there. So can there be some models again similar to the proposal that was mentioned, the concept that was mentioned in the mail that Professor Pathak mentioned about giving a device to class 7 student and so that it remains with them for 5 years from 7 to 12. So that kind of model, if we can think of replicating through whatever means, through PLI scheme or through CSR or in any ways, so that the access to a device is not becomes a challenge in learning. Then the classrooms, very often what we found in my work, whenever I was posted in Nagaland, what we found is that there are schools which have got teachers, but very often these teachers are not properly trained, and it leads to another challenge in learning outcomes. They are not able to teach maths and physics, maths and science properly. So if these classrooms are connected and given a smart screen or something, and a quality lecture is beamed, then it will help the teacher also in learning from them and then be able to teach better to the students. So smart classrooms can become a learning aid even for schools, physical schools where are teachers but not quality teachers. And then similarly, the diets and the training institutions can benefit a lot by technology, by digital teachers can also become training the teachers. So that can also be digital technologies can play a big role in building up the capacities and the infrastructure that is available at our diets for building quality teachers who can teach there. So, and the last point which I would like to mention is again, when we are looking at a digital teacher, it's not only about pedagogy, it's also about capturing the data of what learning is happening. So if we can kind of build a platform in which we're talking academic bank of credits, but if you can build something like academic bank of learnings right from childhood, right from class 1 or something, and if you try to capture like what are the concepts in various subjects which a child has learned. So some kid may do very well in math, some may do in humanities, some may do well in languages, but when the mark sheets, when the final reports cards are given, we only grade them based on the total. But if we are with a digital platform, if we can capture at a granular level of the learning ability of a child in every language, and also if you can in every subject, whether it's maths or science or humanities or languages, and then keep a track of that. So that would also give an insight with regard to how a child is progressing, and maybe we'll be able to identify with the analytics and all, we'll be able to identify what are the strengths or maybe what are the gaps, whether there's the lack of a teacher because of which is leading to some schools not doing very well, and it can give us insights which can help us devising a lot of strategies in addressing the challenges in learning that is happening. So I look at a digital teacher as a digital analytics tool also, which can help us devise policies and interventions, which can help us in improving overall learning outcomes. So these are some thoughts which I wanted to share, and happy to go into a discussion if time permits. Thank you, Rajat.
Thank you, Abhishek, for touching upon some of the very important points, right from having smaller 8 to 10 minute capsules which can be broadcast over TV channels, right up to skilling teachers so that teachers can first increase their skill sets, augment their quality of teaching, and then teach the students. You also talked about digital inclusion, reaching all villages, all educational institutes, even Anganwadi centers, so that whoever needs education across the country really has access to education. And this must also help us bridge the divide between digital haves and digital have-nots, people in the city, students in the rural villages. And we could perhaps look at manufacturing low-cost tablets and enabling device sharing to students through CSR initiatives. Also, you talked about a very interesting concept about academic bank of learning, where we can capture information about students, monitor their learning ability, identify gap areas. And this is actually in the domain of personalized attention to students through AI-enabled bots, where analytics can be used to really help each and every student in a focused manner. So thank you, Abhishek, for raising those wonderful points. We have unfortunately run out of time. So perhaps there is not much time left for, or any time left for a second round of question answer session. So at this stage, I would like to thank all the panelists who have joined us and all the experts for taking time out and debating on those very important topics. Most importantly, not only have you covered very, very important points, but also uncovered a lot of challenges that is facing the education space today. So we will be summarizing these suggestions today and making a presentation at 3:30 later today. And hopefully we will draw some very important actionable points, which we can then pass on to Ministry of Education. So with that, let me formally thank each and every one of you for sharing your thoughts, ideas, and the way forward. I would also like to thank all the listeners across the country who are joining in, and perhaps you can later on send us emails regarding your queries, and we will try to incorporate your suggestions into the final report that we built. Thank you, and have a great day. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Dr. Bose. Very well moderated. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Very well moderated. Thank you.
Thanks, Ranjan. Very.
Thank you.
very
Thank you.
well done.
Thank
My
you.
honor, privilege. Thank you.